How's everyone doing?
Excellent.
They're good.
It's the jet lag finished?
Oh, yeah, like recovering for sure.
Yeah.
So I am.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming to Seoul to talk about chain abstraction, right? I'd love to hear your backgrounds and what brings you here. And yeah, the project that you're working on pretty much, yeah.
You want to start before?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Ethan, although I go by the alias Tabasco online. I do developer relations at Particle Network. I've been doing developer relations now for, I guess, getting close to like 3 years, something like that. Previously, I did developer relations at an RPC provider, and I joined Particle back in September. At Particle, we've been, like, for really our entire lifespan, kind of been focused on solving core UX issues. So trying to get users into Web3 easier and have them actually use Web3 in a way that is as simple as possible, that can actually set the stage for this idea of what we kind of call onboarding the next billion users. So how do we actually do that? It's a much more complicated problem than a lot of people think. And for us, kind of our main solution to this over the past really year and a half has been like social login. So we've been very focused on wallet as a service, onboarding users through email, Google, Twitter, stuff like that, and ideally into smart accounts. So we are very big within like the ERC 437 vertical within the EVM ecosystem. So we facilitate at this point like 7 million user operations with 17 million users on our social login service. And now, like really over the past few months, we recognize that like there's a larger solution that's needed here when it comes to UX improvements, which really is within chain abstraction. Maybe talk a little bit more about that in a second. So this is where we actually just recently announced our own like universal account solution, which is going to be powered by a modular L1 that we're going to be launching as like an infrastructure component. We had doing a lot of cool things in this regard, and we're very excited about the chain abstraction vertical. It's like our number one focus currently. So pumped to be here, and this event looks awesome. I'm glad that I had an opportunity to come up today.
Awesome. I'm Maxwell. I go online usually by Maxwell. And I've done a bunch of things throughout the ecosystem. I worked at ETH Denver for a little while. I did developer relations for Near Developer Hub for about a year. And now I do partnerships for a company called Oxbow or Zero Expo, which is essentially like a privacy and compliance project. I think what kind of unites what I think of as being an Oxbow and chain abstraction is just this idea of kind of bringing blockchain more out of this kind of niche thing that you really have to get very really in the weeds to start understanding and really using in your day-to-day, which I have now for a year, and I understand more what that means. But I think it's definitely harder than it should be if we actually want the kind of user count that we say we do, right? So I think that, starting to build these bridges like Oxbow is doing with kind of uniting with the real world, how things work right now, and also how things currently work in DeFi in the back end. It's kind of what brings us together. I'm very excited about abstraction generally. I think this is the future. And yeah, that's my intro.
And I'm Dean Tribble, and I go by Dean Tribble. And, and I'm CEO of Agoric, and we have a layer one Cosmos-based blockchain that enables programming in JavaScript. So this is started as how do you reach another million developers? And the answer is you got to reach them where they're at, and that's what you program them. But it enables extending that, enables the asynchronous model of JavaScript, it enables long-lived contracts. And so that turns out to make a big difference in programming multi-chain asynchronous systems. And so that's how we tie together with chain abstraction, where that is users seamlessly accessing services and assets on all these different chains. How do you program that? Well, that's an asynchronous environment. You need a way to do that, and that's fundamentally the technology stack that Agoric has. The other thing I'll note is we are co-sponsors of this event with Near, and the Near event team just killed it. The food has been great. This has been great, so give them all a hand. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, asynchronity is something that we like as well at Near. So if you've been diving into, so just wanted to start maybe we're talking about Bridgeless, right? What does Bridgeless mean to you and to your protocol or the product that you're building, and how does that compare with if you had a bridge, right? So how would you think about that sort of paradigm? And we can start with you and then.
Sure. So I mean, we had a fair bit to do with the architecture and creation of IBC, and I've worked in lots of distributed system stuff long before blockchain came along. When I think bridge, I really think of the the rickety bridges that we've seen lose billions of dollars, and if you have this image of from Indiana Jones or whatever, with the rope bridge with one thing and it's shaking as you're trying to go across this crashing falls, that's kind of what the bridge to Polygon is like, right? Any of these multi-sig bridges where there's some guy named Joe, I think he's got the signature this week, and and oh damn, we forgot to release that, and that's what I think of as bridges, and there are billions or tens of billions of dollars that have flowed over these things, and it's absolutely insane. Bridgeless is my core example of that is in fact IBC, right? Where there are real layers, but they aren't trusted. Each blockchain, you're connecting between two blockchains, and the blockchains are verifying the light client of the material at the other end. So it's really like the blockchains are talking to each other. Now, there's Hyperlane, there's mechanisms that people are working on with the data availability layers where they can share some collaboration there. You've got much, much stronger ways of connecting these different blockchains than a rickety multisig. And as I said, there's the IBC is the strongest that I've used, and it's so strong that people just use it routinely, right? Things that other blockchains advertise and get excited about, and there's a huge thing. In the Cosmos ecosystem, that was just Thursday, right? Someone launched a chain, they took their token, they put it on Osmosis, they made pools, they brought it over to Umi, they started loaning it out. They just, tied these things together, and that's just what the infrastructure lets you do. Other ecosystems are catching up with that. That's what I think of as bridgeless, is this ability to have this much more reliable interconnectivity that you can rely on. And we'll talk about how chain abstraction works with that, but that's sort of the bridgeless thing. And I think that is, back to the I don't want that rickety bridge. I don't need that suspense when I'm trying to transfer money in terms of whether my money's going to make it to the other side or fall into the crashing falls below. And so that's what I'm excited about.
That was a good answer. So I guess for me, when I think about bridgeless, I think that a bridge is just kind of a terrible solution to the problem, right? Basically, I think that we've kind of just moved past, hopefully, this whole idea that we can truly have a single monolithic chain, right? And if you can't have a single monolithic chain, then bridges are really like, I would say that they were a Band-Aid before, and in the future of interoperability of modular blockchains, all that kind of stuff, a bridge is a terrible solution. For one thing, it's this huge honeypot of stealable funds that, like, the idea that you could have that level of security risk is just kind of mind-blowing in the world of billions of dollars that get transferred across these things. So for me, I think that, chain abstraction, bridgeless technology is really more about abstracting away the need for each individual user to handle all these different accounts and really worry about where their funds are and have all of that just take place seamlessly on the back end, whether it's through kind of like a decentralized, centralized exchange or something similar, right? Or just accounts that manage accounts on other blockchains, the way that kind of Near has been working on these days. Anyway, I think that's kind of what it means to me.
Yeah, I really liked kind of your context that you gave regarding this evolution of like focusing on monolithic design to modular design. This is something that we recognize. I think this is, there's still a big debate going on. I mean, you had the big Solana versus Celestia debate that happened over Twitter over the past few days. So, but for us, like, we do really align with this idea of like chains are ultimately going in the direction of, modularity. And eventually what we really want to see is like thousands of modular rollups that exist throughout the ecosystem. But the issue that this poses, right? Like, maybe this is a solution for scalability. That's great. But the issue here is that there's a lot of UX fragmentation and liquidity fragmentation that happens as a result. So how do you solve this? Well, it probably isn't through traditional bridges where, I used to be a big fan of the Harmony community back a few years ago, and unfortunately they got hit by one of the multi-sig hacks, and that's no more. So we want to avoid that, right? We want a solution that is easier for users and can kind of create a more interoperable experience. And of course, like in our case, what we really want is we want users to experience kind of this interoperable nature and this movement of funds without necessarily knowing that it's happening in the back end. So it's like, how do you move funds securely without traditional bridging mechanisms? For us, we're really getting into, like, have a lot of conversations with Hyperlane, Layer 0, and Axelar, stuff like this, to kind of figure out ways where we can kind of have alternative mechanisms of moving funds that is secure, that retains, a lot of speeds. Like, we're kind of trying to aim for actually like atomic cross-chain transactions that happen in less than 5 seconds. So like the vision that we have is that ultimately a user will go do a transaction on base, for example, that costs 1 ETH. They have some amount of ETH on Arbitrum. Well, then how do we get those funds from Arbitrum over to base without like asking them to go and do a traditional bridge? So this experience that we want to create is that ideally a user doesn't have to think about what chain they're on. They don't have to think about if they're bridging funds, how they're going to do that, what bridge they're going to use. They just do the transaction. And in the back end, we can basically facilitate and coordinate all these different transactions to make that possible in a way that is, again, secure and very fast. So this is kind of the model that we're approaching. And we believe that like this tied in with even like MPC secured external accounts, like we are diving into this same idea of like securing or controlling accounts on like even Bitcoin and Solana via MPC nodes. I know that, of course, chain signatures with the Near dives really into this as well. But we think that like a combination of these different technologies will hopefully create a user experience that isn't reliant on bridges, is very fast, and ultimately invisible from the user. So this is really what we want. We want this to be invisible. We want users to be able to leverage applications without hopefully knowing what chain that they're on. This is kind of at the core of chain abstraction. This is really what we believe to be one of the core values of actually achieving chain abstraction, what we're building towards today.
I would just say, can I ask a question to the audience? Okay, so how many people here in the last day or two use something like Uber or something like DoorDash, right? Raise your hand. Okay. Okay, now keep your hand up if you have any idea which cloud service they were running on and actually gave a damn. Anyone? Anyone still care about which cloud service they, when they were waiting for their hamburger or their car to arrive? Okay, no one cared, right? So one of the things, so chain abstraction is really the realization that users, when they're using this blockchain stuff, they're not gonna care, right? The fact that people still think that anyone who's trying to do something in, when we get out there to the millions or billions of users is gonna give a damn about whether it's Solana or Ethereum. When Mattel publishes an NFT, they don't care about OpenSea, they don't care, none of these are gonna matter, right? They're just gonna deliver something to their customers. And one of the things that means is that it will hide these bridges. It will hide the connections because we have not succeeded unless we hide the connections and the transfers, right? And so there will be money flowing, but in the same way that when I paid for DoorDash, I have no idea which channels the money that flowed when I bought my hamburger were secure, were reporting, went to the Russian or Chinese government or the U.S. government, went to the, to whoever it is that's paying attention. I have no idea, right? We have the same issue with bridges. And so one of the things we do need to do is keep moving the technology in the direction of actually giving us the safety and the privacy and the assurance that we want, while hiding all of that from the user so they can find out if they care, but mostly they don't, right? We want to have the assurance that all this will just work and be safe, and we've got the technologies for it, but right now, there's an awful lot of money that remains going across these systems that don't deserve the money, right? That are much more fragile than they should be for us to be building stuff that hides it from users.
Yeah, if we're going to do audience engagement, how many people have used a bridge in, say, the last month? How many enjoyed using that bridge? It's pretty much what I would figure.
How many didn't realize they were using the bridge?
I mean, that's the whole other thing, right? It's just like it's a frustrating experience, and it's definitely it's not something that we can just assume is going to continue this way.
Well, yeah, this clearly states the problem that everybody's just like, there's a lot of bridges.
But there's also, as I said, there are these technologies. We need to push people to move to that.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of projects that came out with we're going to start by being centralized, and then we will go federated, and then they will be decentralized. That was 3 years ago. They're probably still centralized. And they have done nothing to move in that direction because they don't have they don't actually have anyone holding them accountable to that until they lose a lot of money because they had some horrible breach. And then they go out of business, so they never get decentralized because, because they no longer can.
And going away from the problem, so we know that this is the problem, right? How do you guys tackle this problem, right? Especially given Agoric and all the other folks out there, right? Like, how do you guys think about it and how do you solve it? And then I'll have follow-ups on that one as well.
Yeah, so at Particle, we kind of take this approach very closely tied in with what I just mentioned, where really what we want to do is kind of create this technology that we call universal accounts. Now, universal accounts are very simply just ERC4 through 7 smart account implementations that users can onboard into through social logins or through their MetaMask or anything of this nature. And then this account implementation is actually directly tied to our modular L1 chain that we're going to be deploying very soon. Now, the point of this chain is purely kind of two different things. Number one is to kind of act as a coordination layer or a storage layer for these smart accounts, just so that kind of be a single source of truth for the state of the smart account. But also, more interestingly, The point of this chain is to actually coordinate and kind of kick off cross-chain transactions that can then result in the movement of funds on a per transaction basis. So kind of tying back to the example I mentioned a moment ago, where I want to do a transaction worth 1 ETH on Base, and I have that equivalent amount in ETH on Arbitrum. So like, how do I do this? Well, as a user, I don't want the user to think about this. So what they can do is, through the utilization of a universal account, they have these funds on their universal account. They want to do a transaction on Base in this example. They have the funds on Arbitrum. And to do this transaction, they just simply confirm the transaction. They sign it. Within the same kind of short time window of signing this transaction, we can kick off a transaction, generally using the same signature, that can then facilitate the movement of these funds from Arbitrum over to Base. They now have the funds on Base, and the transaction they actually confirmed then gets kicked off and completed. So for them, they actually don't know that they had funds on another chain, or that they were using a chain that deviates from where they deposited funds from. They're very simply just executing the transaction. And now the way that we're actually doing this in the back end is still quite up in the air. We are about to release our full white paper very soon, but really we're going to be using a combination of, number one, Hyperlane. We are very close with them. We're going to be kind of developing our own ISM for optimistic cross-chain message verification. Very similar thing with Layer 0 using our custom DVN. Then also we're tying in kind of almost in a cross-like implementation of value transfers. So for example, paying a relayer some amount of funds, USDT or some native token, and they pay you back on your destination chain. Then they kind of confirm the transaction, they pay themselves back plus a fee. We thought about this kind of model as well. But in general, these are kind of the two main ways that we're thinking about actually moving the funds. For the end user, this is invisible, of course, and for them, they're very simply just click and confirm. Then maybe it's an extra, ideally for us, 5 to 10 seconds at max that it takes to move funds from that chain A to chain B, and then execute the transaction given the amount that they need to do that transaction. So for them, it actually feels like they have one balance for every chain. So you get the experience of a monolithic chain, but of course you get the scalability and the objective benefits of a more modular open ecosystem. But for the user, they don't know that it's a modular open ecosystem, but of course, infrastructurally, we're reaping those benefits. So this is kind of our approach to it, why we believe Bridgeless, or this idea of abstracting away the bridging experience and even using alternative mechanisms of moving funds, to be so important, not only on the security side, but also achieving this idea of true chain abstraction, and really giving users this experience of a monolithic design.
And to me, we use the term orchestration that sort of, orchestration is to chain abstraction what modular is to data availability, right? It's really the thing you get after. It is, how do you solve the problem of programming this stuff? And there are a couple of ways to approach it. I have a talk, in a half hour or so that will go into details about how Agoric approaches it. But the key thing you want is good ways to be able to program that kind of asynchronous activity such that you can change the implementation without changing all of the development of it, right? So it's exactly, move money from here to there. Right now, I'm using this rickety-ass bridge, right? And tomorrow, we would like to retire that thing and replace it with, IBC, Hyperlane, Axelar, any Gravity, any of these mechanisms that are better than this rickety bridge, right? And we would like to do that without requiring a whole lot of stuff to be rebuilt, because that's just that particular ability to transfer got a reasonable amount of abstraction from the point of view of the smart contracts. And so we need a lot of that sort of stuff rather than winding into how we build everything, exactly which mechanism it's going to use, such that they're all petrified into our infrastructure. We really want to be able to upgrade from there and get rid of retire some of the legacy stuff, right? And it's sort of it's scary that things that are 2 years old are now legacy, but that's how fast we move here, right? And so that orchestration is how do you program chain abstraction things, and that's something that as I said, there's lots of approaches, there's lots of people chewing on various parts of that, but that's the heart of getting the ability to better solve these problems.
I kind of so I don't have quite as much of a sophisticated answer because I don't have a vested necessary interest in this, but I do think that what's interesting to me about ZK proofs in particular in this context is that a proof that's good in one place is good everywhere else, right? And I think that if you have a deposit that is provable in one place and provable in another, then really you can take your assets and move them anywhere and be relatively confident that you're not going to get, some massive security loophole in either of those places. I think that this is kind of this is why I think of privacy pools as being partially a cross-chain technology potentially, and also how you can enable things like an on-chain bank or an on-chain exchange and do that in a way that's relatively secure and doesn't have to be validated by a sufficiently decentralized validator network on its own, which is, of course, a very, very expensive thing to set up if you ever worked at a layer one. Like getting your bootstrapping your validators, your nodes, all that sort of stuff can be a process. So I guess that's my non-answer to the question.
That's a great answer. So thinking about, I guess, in the future of all these, like we don't care about the details. I don't care that the assets move, using IBC or whatever.
It's just
Yes,
the user
we do care. I agree, but the users don't care, right? So in that future, like, how does experience a blockchain or a decentralized application look like, and what's the future that you want to see building these tools for others to kind of benefit from, right?
Well, I open up my app. I say I'd like a hamburger delivered to my house, and I would like that to happen without all of my secrets being revealed to all of the 30 different parties that along the way that make that transaction happen, right? So the user experiences, I'm in a game and I kill a dragon. There's no crypto here except that created an NFT, and I have this thing that celebrates with the raid group, and I can use that as a participation thing later to get into some tournament or get into some event at a discount or buy merch or whatever it is, right? It's all of the things that we currently do with finance, deserve the level of integrity that blockchain brings. And right now it's running on Web 2 systems that can all be rug pulled and routinely are, right? And so I think that's, what it looks like is a better, faster, stronger version of the online world that I have right now.
Yeah, as far as the open web vision that we're all building for, I think that's pretty much the perfect answer, right? Like, I think that once we're actually using these things in the day-to-day, like, the only way you're going to actually build these kind of applications is at the point where you've abstracted this stuff away enough and that it is truly seamless on the back end. From the perspective of like the degen DeFi use case that I think is like most of what goes on today, like I find it incredibly annoying to have to move funds to Solana so that I can buy dog with hat.
I mean, we're going to degen more if there's chain abstraction.
I hope so.
Wait, do it. We're supposed to?
Are we going to degen more if there's
Are we
chain
going to Are we going to degen more? I think that that part.
more time, Ted? There's more time to degen because we're not using bridges, right?
The degen thing, however you may feel about it, is here to stay for now. And I think that like people clearly want it. People will clearly throw a lot of money at it. As long as there's money in it, people are going to keep wanting to do it. And I think from that perspective, like that's certainly something everybody wants, because having to, for instance, change the chain narratives so that we can start having a meme coin season on one place or another and start harvesting all the gains.
You need me.
I think you really do want to. If you are not Solana or maybe Base now, whichever chain we're aping on these days, then I think you probably are really hoping to see some chain abstractions soon.
Can I correct my answer here? Because you remind me of something. I said what I want is like the world I currently have, but that's really not true. There's a bunch of new use cases that smart contracts enable. There's a bunch of, and some of those are, something boring, right? Let's take car automotive loans, right? With blockchain now, you could have someone in Germany buy a position on U.S. car automotive loans because they think they're doing some new German engineering that will make a difference in their market. You can't do that right now because you can't do the international flows very well. You can't safely provide information in a zero-knowledge fashion so that you're not disclosing everybody's private details on their mortgage loans to some random guy in Germany, right? And that's all stuff that you could enable, and that's stuff that, yeah, we can kind of do some of that now, but just lowering the barrier raises the level of economy we get. And that particular boring example could be worth, tens of billions of dollars by itself as a use case, right? Getting this in chain of custody for freight gets you, I think they estimate a 5% increase in world trade, which is, $20 trillion a year or something, right? I mean, these things, by being able to raise the level of assurance at which we execute financial transactions and enable strangers to cooperate, you get more strangers cooperating, you get more economic activity, and that's generally better for all of us, including the DJs.
Yeah, I think that some fantastic points were made. I think it ultimately, at least for us, comes down to this idea of Web3 has a lot of undeniable benefits. self-sovereignty, decentralization. I mean, these are things that we absolutely need just in the internet and when it comes to like financial movements, stuff like this. But like, how do you have this be integrated within not only like the like internet ecosystem, but also like you mentioned, like financial movements and whatnot? How do you do this without I mean, honestly, just how do you do this with like removing Web3 from it? Like, how do you retain these benefits? Like removing Web3 from the experience? Because like Web3 itself is a very difficult technology to use as of today. So it's like, I mean, we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars into removing the existing user experience and creating something that is more parallel to what you would find on Web 2. Because I think like what's been good to see is as an industry, you've kind of evolved past this expectation of like, we're going to onboard 1 billion users and we're going to teach them all how to use Web 3. And it's like, this probably won't happen.
That's like saying we're going to teach them how to use cloud. Right. The answer is, when cloud was rolling out, all of these same questions happened around cloud. And now everything's on cloud, you don't care and nobody knows, right?
Well, if we all have AI agents or something like that, but...
Yeah, like... It's a good example, kind of with Web 2, there's always these new technologies that eventually we remove and we kind of create an experience that people are already familiar with. And of course, this accelerates adoption and makes people more comfortable with the technology and so on. So for us, it's like, how do we actually achieve this? How do we remove that Web3 experience? And how do we, of course, accelerate Web3 into being adopted to this degree? And of course, for us, we kind of see this experience, at least on the user side. Like, I think we can get really deep into like the institutional side and stuff like this, like what that looks like. But for us, we're more focused on like directly like consumers that use Web3. And so we see this as sort of like a user will download an app or go to some sort of web app. They'll log in as they would with any Web2 application. They use their email or their Google or something like that. If they want to use like a traditional wallet, then they have the opportunity to, but we want to make sure that like they have a direct path that they're already familiar with. They start using the application. They don't know what chain it's on. They can deposit funds directly from their bank account if they want to use it. They can do transactions without necessarily needing to have gas. They can do gas transactions. They can then go to a different application using that same account that's derived from their social login. They don't already do any bridging. They can do more transactions there using the same balances they deposited before, or also doing gas transactions. I mean, we want this experience where like really a user doesn't know that they're using Web3. They should have zero idea that they're using Web3. But of course, still retain those core benefits like I mentioned a moment ago. So this is the experience that we need. And honestly, I don't think we're too far away from it. I think that we already have like the first 50% of that. We have the onboarding process. Onboarding Web3 right now is fantastic. I mean, you can create a really great user experience through social login, through account abstraction. This infrastructure already exists. This is what we've been building out for 2 years now. But the issue more right now is that like there's still this unsolved problem of the multi-chain experience. And we see solving this as really being the last step that we need to get to that experience where Web3 is totally removed from the experience. So this is like why we're investing so much in chain abstraction, why we believe that it's so fundamental to this experience of a completely Web3 removed kind of, consumer ready platform. So this is something that we've been quite excited about.
Yeah, and I do want to just add, I think that like unifying all these systems is definitely a big component. I think the security part as well is like incredibly key, because part of the reason that so many individuals and definitely institutions don't actually participate in this right now is that the risk is so high. Like the idea that somebody could just take all of your money because you accidentally left your 12-word phrase in the wrong cupboard and somebody robbed your house that day, something like that. That's not going to fly for the vast majority of people in the world. And probably we are going to end up, we're going to need something that's at a minimum more secure and probably semi-custodial with like more guarantees in place.
Awesome. We have 2 minutes to go, so I'm just aware of that. So let's say we go back home, we come back a year later, which I think you should guys come to street, like Korea again. Where do we want to be, right? In a couple of sentences. Like, I know that last year was a con abstraction that everybody was talking about. Now we went to the chain abstraction level. When we come back in a year, in a couple of sentences, where do we want to be?
So there are 2 steps. The first step, we're talking about these longer term things, but the first step is for the degens, for the traders, it's even hard for them to do a cross-chain application, right? People don't, and so that needs to be easy. There's all these simple use cases, and forget portfolio management and remote access to loans and all that sort of stuff. I've got USDC and I want to stake TIA. That requires 3 signatures across 5 chains or some crazy ass thing, right? It's just insane. That should be easy. But the consequence of that is the applications people want are not ETH applications, or not Solana applications, or not Cosmos applications. They're Web3 applications that use all of these. And so a year from now, we should mostly be seeing those, right? I don't want to play a Solana game. I want to play a game, right? And sometimes I play on Xbox with PS3, PS5 players. Same thing, right? You know, you've got participants that will span these chains. So we want to see that. And then we want to see that some of these are now starting to go out to actually reach non-crypto users because we've got this in our head of how we design things. Now we're actually delivering solutions that they care about, which we haven't done before.
So I'm kind of a big believer in, like, you know, things happen very slowly and then all at once, right? I have no idea where we're going to be in a year. I'm very skeptical that we're going to be in all that different of a place. But if I had like one thing, I'd like to finally see, let's say, somebody make something that's maybe an almost universal account. I think that's a reasonable goal, and I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I think like, and maybe it's naive, but I think that we're at point Web3 now where like we're entering a bull market, or I guess we already have entered it, to be honest.
I'd like to be rich in a year.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. But I think that like that usually typically results in a lot of onboarding, a lot of visibility for Web3. So I think this paired with the fact that like, of course, we're now getting to the point where these technologies are viable. We're already seeing implementations. Chain signatures on Near, I believe, are already getting to the point where like you guys are in testnet and stuff like that, which is great. For us, we're going to release our testnet in a few weeks for our universal accounts. And like these things, I think, are happening at the perfect time where we're going to kind of have this intersection, I hope, of like the bull market, all these technologies kind of coming to fruition where we'll see this experience that really is worthy of consumer onboarding. We aren't there yet, but my goal is that in a year we'll be at that point. Then that's when we can really start focusing on getting these killer use cases out, getting these killer applications out, and actually the harder part, which is onboarding users. But I think we're just now getting to the point where we actually have the tools and the infrastructure that can do that. So that's at least my take on it.
That's weird.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, I guess.
Thank you for having us.
We could have still continued, but I just saw that zero.
Are we out of
We're
time?
getting kicked out.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everybody for listening.
Thanks, guys.